I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese, Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is market historian Bob Hoye. He's the chief investment strategist for institutionaladvisors.com. Welcome back to the show, Bob.
Hi, Jim. Good to be with you.
What kind of reaction are you seeing because of the election of Donald Trump?
Oh, my God. The financial markets are all over the place. On the night of the election, as the results were coming in late, the Dow at one time on futures trading was down 900, huge, about 5%. And then by the end of the trading day, on Wednesday, it was up 300, and then it's added to it since. And but this was, of course, overnight. You've got thin markets. Plus, you had obviously a bunch of impassioned traders who decided they had to get out and into a illiquid market. So it was just plain foolish trading. Now, on the financial markets, we had expected things to sell off generally and perhaps clear in November. So lows a few days ago were fine, and maybe they might clear, maybe they might not. But what is interesting, though, is that the election itself has stood the establishment on its ears. This is a very profound change in politics, and my essays that I've been writing on it for some time, this goes back, I gave a paper to the Committee for Monetary Research and Education 3 years ago at one of their dinner meetings, and the title was Revolution Without Intellectuals. And the thesis was that you've had in the past two different kinds of revolutions, and one, and let's get rid of the bad ones first, is the Russian Revolution in 1917 and the French Revolution of the late 1700s. And they took place in a background of popular dissatisfaction. You know, the people were getting a rough shake and they were getting pissed off about it. And then came the uprising, and then in those two dreadful examples, the revolution was caught up in the hands of neurotic intellectuals who have certain specific personal ideas of how things should be run, get control of the power, and then start murdering anybody who disagrees with them. So those are the bad ones. But then there are good revolutions in the past. The American Revolution was run by businessmen, individuals, smallholders, farmers, everything else who, guess what, were fed up with excessive interference and taxation from the Brits, which was a dreadful error by the Brits, but and we don't want to go into that. But it would have been one of those. It's not a neurotic revolution. It was constructive. It was unfortunate that it had to go to warfare, and that was mainly because of stupidity in the British Crown. But there is one example from England in 1688. It's been called the Glorious Revolution, whereby you had an absolutist king, an absolutist government, and Brits have always even back to the 1200s, liked freedom. And so there was dissatisfaction, and the Stuart Crown was authoritarian and Catholic, and they were thinking of bringing in troops from France to impose the government's will on the people in England. And this is a bad idea. So Protestant business interests in London, plus as smallholders, people all over England, were dissatisfied. So it was a popular uprising, and it fell into the hands of the right people, and they realized they still had to have a king, so they brought in over William of Orange and set him up, and at the end of it, I can't remember which writer said that it was a very close-run thing. There was literally no bloodshed. And actually, later on in 1944, with the invasion of Normandy, Eisenhower did say that one was a very close-run thing. So we have clearly a popular dissatisfaction. Why is there dissatisfaction? Because the governments have been on a very expansive direction, and they've been taking lots of money out of the game and putting in lots of rules and regulations, which impairs the productivity, so that the average take-home pay, adjusted for inflation, in the last 20 years hasn't gone up at all. And while some people may not be looking at those exact index numbers, but they know it at home. And plus, you've got the establishment going on about unemployment at 5% when you got 95 million people no longer looking for jobs. So it's all a lot of nonsense. And then you had then the Obama administration taking every thing to the limits. Everything needed to be controlled. They're going to control the climate. The central bank is going to control everything. And but this is quite a huge audacity. Can you imagine somebody thinking they can control the climate? I mean, for gosh sakes. So anyways, all of this intrusion is going on, and it even corrupted the Republicans with a portion of the old establishment part of the Republicans going along with Obama and the Democrats. And that finally reached a climax a year ago, I guess in December, with with Ryan as head of the Republican House going along with virtually whatever Obama was proposing. I don't know why. So anyways, you have then popular dissatisfaction. And it needed a voice, but the view I had going back a year or so ago is that the movement to move against big government would find a leader. And the main thing is that it is an uprising, and that with a lot of power. The last time you saw something like this was in Eastern Europe in 1989, when the same thing happened. Ordinary folks looked at how well the governing classes were living, looked at the promises of wonderful things from the governing classes, looked at their own prosperity and said, hey, this is not working. Now, that uprising took on a state that was fully prepared to use tanks and Kalashnikovs, but the trick was it didn't. But as it occurred in Czechoslovakia, the then key mover in there was Governor Havlek, and he was highly educated, intellectual, and he wrote that it is a movement of a powerful movement by the powerless. So, and here you have what has happened. You had Trump get up and say in strong measures a big no to political correctness, which was an extremely daunting thing to do. And at the time I wrote that, hey, Trump will go down in history as getting up and saying a very effective no. And then the whole thing gathered steam, and I guess one could say now that with the win, that it needed somebody with a very strong will and bluster. But it would have been anybody. It's the political movement that's driving this, and it turned out to be very successful. I know I was talking with some people a few weeks ago and said that in British Columbia a long time ago there was a small C conservative government that was maintained majorities for almost 30 years, And it was, the joke was, it was run by little old ladies in tennis shoes. But it would win election after election. But none of the right people would ever admit to voting for it. So this was a similar example here. Nobody would really admit to wanting to vote for Trump. But if you look back on it, if he had have been polite and not rough, I would suggest that the condemnation and vilification by the media would have been just as strident. Because you've got to look in Canada with Prime Minister Harper in almost a decade in office there, and he was polite, and he got the same treatment that Trump got. But the main thing is that you ended up in the United States with a very dangerous political condition. Ideally, one would have, as it's set up, you have the legislative branch with both houses, and you have the executive branch with the White House, then you have the judiciary, and then theoretically you're supposed to have a critical press, or now critical media. But what has happened over the last 25 or 30 years is that the media became very ambitious about government and wanted big government, whatever the thing was. So you ended up with the White House. You had ended up with not much opposition from Congress, and you had media, 94% Democrat. So this became a monolithic political machine, which is dangerous in any society. And the idea was not to argue against whatever the Republicans who were opposed. It was to destroy any opposition. It was an attempt to create a one-party system. And this is where this is so exciting, is because the uprising was strong enough to get enough votes out against a very formidable machine with the Democrats, led by Hillary. Now, here was the other contrast, is that with WikiLeaks coming out, and of course part of the media that protects the authoritarian movement wouldn't publish any criticism of Hillary. So it was mainly in Fox and Internet and stuff like that. So it was fascinating to see how people were responding. If you looked in various Internet places where the comments were getting, over the year, comments in the social media were getting more and more better informed about the condition. And so the frustration with those who would find excessive government too much for the last few weeks was just wondering how much it could be throttled. And take a look at what cracked it open was the WikiLeaks. And then even the FBI had become corrupted. The judiciary had become corrupted. Can you imagine Bill Clinton, who has already been impeached and lost his license as to operate as a lawyer, meeting privately with the head of the Department of Justice? I mean, the corruption is staggering, and actually it got to the point where the corruption, I thought, was, could prevail. And then the tide changed, and a friend of mine said it about rightly a week ago. He said you can just sort of feel it. The people are getting totally fed up with the Democrat side, with the media. And then you had the election, and it came in, and in reading articles published since, that the establishment cannot believe what has happened. But then you could jump back in time, back to 1989, when the same uprising took on a murderous police state. And can you imagine being with Pravda then in Moscow, or whatever the news agency was in Berlin, East Berlin, and then the establishment there. You got all the power in the world, and suddenly it's gone. So it's one of those things where in Eastern Europe under communism, the imposition of authority was 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, all of the time, this fist. And then on the other half of the equation is the ordinary public who submitted to this authority. And then in 89, in an instant, both sides knew that it had changed. The authoritarian side didn't send in the tanks and the Kalashnikovs, and the submissive side said, hey, we can do it. And they took on a murderous police state, and the ultimate example, or the symbol of it, was the fall of the Berlin Wall. Now guess what the date of that was? November the 9th, 1989, and this election was November the 8th, and of course on the 9th was the realization that a major change had happened. It's just one of those wonderful coincidences. So I look at this change, this election in the United States, as being the equivalent of bringing down the Berlin Wall in 1989. But the irony is that the Obama administration and the Democrats spent the last 8 years building the regulatory equivalent of the Berlin Wall, and more imposition of authority. And so there was that's comparing it to Europe in 1989 is one thing. That's the most recent successful uprising. But if you want to get into the really big picture, was that in the 1500s in Europe, the experiment in authoritarian government took over the Catholic Church, which was the only organization that existed at the time, and turned it into a bureaucratic, bloodthirsty monster. And it was worth your life to oppose it. You know, the Department of Inquisition, if you were offending the state church, you then had an interview with the Department of Inquisition, and if you didn't shape up then, they'd seize your assets. And if you still didn't shape up and get on with the party line, you were burned at the stake. I think at some point I read that the reason why the church then was burning heretics at the stake was that some scholar had read that the Bible said the priest shouldn't shed blood, so they burned him at the stake instead. So this is an equivalent you had in Europe then. The state was promoting astrology. It was also backing alchemy. It had its own corruption of science with the theory that the solar system revolved around the Earth, and backed it very stridently. And then, so the whole a part of the Reformation in the 1600s was individuals getting hold of their life, and there was a terrific search for truth. And so alchemy became chemistry, a proper science. Astrology became astronomy, a proper science. And the whole world moved to review institutions, authoritarian institutions that had grown up and had become intrusive. So it was a reformation against big government, and it was successful. And I'd say that trend towards personal freedom went on until around 1900. And then for some reason or other, the whole through the 20th century became another one of those dreadful experiments in authoritarian government, and of course backed with and funded by currency depreciation and state theft, all the nasty things. So in the big picture, this really is the equivalent of the end of the nasty part of the Roman Empire, beginning in around 310 AD, and the end of the Catholic Church becoming particularly nasty and bloodthirsty. Oh, it began to change in the early 1600s, and here we are now this experiment in authoritarian government backed by currency depreciation has now run since the Fed opened its doors in 1914. So it's more than 100 years, I guess. Let's put the turning point around 1900 and the whole disaster of authoritarian government. So this election, which really is the voice of the people against a monolithic party that was the state, the apparatus of government, most of the media, the judiciary, the FBI, had all become corrupted. And I think this is now irrevocable. A general public has now the initiative, and I think it will be very successful. The opposition from now, the other side, bureaucrats have been on the offensive and expanding everything they can think of. And at least now there's a voice of no, in which case bureaucrats will still be there, but they'll be more or less on the defensive. So I think this is a very big point, and it will be successful. There'll be some ups and downs like the financial markets, but I think one wants to go and read about the Reformation of the 1600s, and particularly there's a good Google write-up on the Glorious Revolution of 1688, and that's what we're doing here. Now, there's still every chance that the neurotic intellectuals could become even nastier, but I think they've lost the political power. The people are just going to say, shut up, get out of my life, I'm not going to, so it's all going to change. And Jim will wrap it up with saying it's very exciting times.
And before we go, we'll have a question from Belgium for Bob to answer. We'll be back right after the break.
Gem International is a new diamond explorer in the richest diamond producing country in Africa, located next to the fourth largest producing diamond mine in the world. International Spotlight is on an 1109 carat diamond recently discovered in Africa by a fellow Canadian junior with a proven operator and finance team. Gem International trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol GI. Visit us at gemdiamondmining.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Bob Hoye. Bob, it seems to me it wouldn't be a proper show unless we had a question from Frank de Beer in Belgium. His question.
We're always glad to get Frank's questions.
Yes, they're always good. His question to you, Bob, is the fiscal stimulus promise of Trump going to cancel the post-bubble contraction, or do you see the market rally on Trump's stimulus announcement as the final push into the top?
Good question. At the moment, the election has driven, as I said, while the election was concluding, Dow down 900 points, 5%, and then very strong since. You've also got a strong rally in base metals because Trump's going to do this and we're going to get infrastructure going. But I think these are all near-term opportunistic trades. And what we're going to watch now is, as we would with any mature financial market, the credit spreads are just beginning to widen. The yield curve has steepened enough that it's been exciting for the banks, but if it steepens further, then it signals a contraction. So, well, I guess traders will have some fun with this, but I wouldn't. And the whole of the brokerage industry has all been caught up for the last number of weeks. I mean, some of the firms are really good and did have say that if Trump wins, then these construction stocks would do well and Caterpillar would do well. And that's been the case. But I don't think it's got any legs to it, a long-term idea. I think we're just going to stay with is it overbought or is it oversold? And then within this, we've got a building reversal in credit spreads, not enough to get excited about yet, and we've already had the turn to steepening, but it's been in the phase that helps the bank stocks. So let's just watch the credit markets.
Bob, thanks a lot for chatting with us.
Jim, good to be with you.
My guest has been market historian Bob Hoye. He's the chief investment strategist for institutionaladvisors.com. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Our popular YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. You can forward questions to Bob to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.